Hi everybody, I'm here with Wendy Gordon, who I don't think needs much introduction. Most of us who are in this world, in this industry, have been influenced by Wendy over the years, both by her mentoring, her advice, her great understanding of qualitative research for any of us who have grown up in qual. So, hi Wendy, how are you?
I'm well. Happy New Year.
Well, thank you very much. We're here to talk about your latest book, Mindframes, and for those of you who are watching, here is a great image of this book which helps us to understand the content, and a little bit more of that in a moment. I wanted to ask you first, Wendy, why you decided to write this book and what possessed you, having written Good Thinking and worked so hard on that, to set about writing number 2?
Well, I think there are quite a few reasons. I mean, one of them is when you get to my age, a kind of idea of closure or a legacy. My editor even asked me whether it was a vanity project. But seriously though, Good Thinking was about good practice. And it was really about the methodologies, your choice of techniques, the how to do qualitative research. And since then, 1997 it was, there have been many sort of conferences, books, all sorts of things on the how-tos. But what I felt was important was, which led me to Mindframes, was trying to get across some of the key principles of good thinking that underlie good practice.
And do you feel that there are people in our industry who simply don't have the same grasp of these constructs as maybe I did 30 years ago when I came into the industry?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. I mean, people are coming into the industry from all sorts of different backgrounds. Some from business, from languages, from anything. And I don't think that they have the grounding in the thinking and theories that we grew up with when we sort of got into commercial qualitative research.
Sure. And I think it's quite interesting for us to think a little bit about the book and try and understand what the overarching thought is behind it. So let's talk about it by way of a poem to begin with. I think the cover of the book brings this poem to life. I'll show that all to you one more time. I think it would be really interesting for Wendy to read this poem to us. It does help set the scene. Certainly did for me when she read it to me. So over to you.
Well, this must be the first time I've ever read a poem in public. Well, I hope somebody's listening anyway. But it's called The Blind Man and the Elephant, and it was written sometime between 1816 and 1887 by John Godfrey Saxe the first. So here goes. It was 6 men of Hindustan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl. God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall. There's a wall on the picture. The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear. The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a snake. The fourth reached out an eager hand, and felt about the knee. What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain, quoth he. 'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree. The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, even the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, this marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So often theologic wars, the disputants I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant, not one of them is seen. So really it is about conflicting beliefs, I mean, if you've come from different backgrounds and you're trying to work together, you're going to feel that however you were taught or what your experience was is the correct one. But it's only when you get to know other people's points of view or other people's theoretical thinking that you are able to get a better picture. So that's what it's about.
I think that it sounds really interesting, and the constraints that we all have with time at the moment mean it's great to be able to have some sort of reference to different perspectives, different lenses on which we can interpret the data that we are completely flooded with in today's world. So I think you've identified some mind frames in the book and you refer to them as mind frames. Can you tell us what a mind frame is to start off with?
Well, I think of a mind frame as a map. If you were going to a foreign country, you might look up a temperature map, you might be travelling by road, you'd look up a road map, you might look where all the cultural sites are, you might want a political map to see whether it was dangerous on the borders or not. So each map represents an aspect of reality, but each one is selective because they have to leave things out. So you need to combine maps, or mind frames in this case, to get a more rounded or a truer picture.
It's interesting because I was talking to Adam Morgan of Eat Big Fish the other day, and he was telling me that we live in this post-truth world where we're not necessarily driven by what's true, we're driven by a perspective or a view on things. And I wonder if, in order to make sure we retain our integrity, at least if we have some models through which we can pass our knowledge, our learning, our understanding on a given research project or a piece of planning strategy, that at least means we have some integrity behind what we're saying.
Absolutely, but I think what all of us need to understand who are practicing today is that you need to be authoritative. You can't just say, well, we should do this, or we can do that, or we can combine these three methods. You need to be able to explain to clients what this rests on. And then I think that we can talk about integrity, but not just through a methodological mix, if you like.
Sure. Okay, so why don't you take us through what the 6 mind frames are?
Well, let me just spell them out. So the first one is unconscious, the unconscious, which is one I started with. Then I went on to understanding difference, what liking really means in a research context, so it's called liking. Behaviour is the fourth, language, and the final one is context. Those are the 6.
So shall we start where you started? Let's begin with the unconscious.
This was a difficult one, but this mind frame helps to explain the importance of understanding unconscious mental processes. And I'm sure that most people would have heard the fact that human beings operate out of about a 1% consciousness and 99 or 98% is unconscious. So I believe the unconscious is the keystone to understanding why people do what they do, why they say what they say, and just how they think. So that's why I started with this mind frame.
I think when we were talking and I was reading the book, I was thinking about everything we do from blushing to breathing is an unconscious manoeuvre. It's our body responding to an unconscious thought, and yet we still force consumers to try and articulate things. And it just reminded me how much we corrupt what we're learning because we're asking people to take stock of what they don't understand. They're thinking half the time. It's a really interesting space, and I found this chapter very, very useful. So can you tell us a bit more about what you cover in it?
Okay, so I suppose there's sort of 3 themes in it. First of all, I explore while mentioning the unconscious to a client, to most people. They'll run the proverbial mile from it. It seems to be tainted in some way, or people are highly suspicious of it. So, I sort of try and find out the reasons for that or explain it. Then I go on to provide a sort of a classification of different kinds of unconscious processing that all human beings share. And, in it I sort of conclude that we need a more specific language. I mean, the unconscious is a big and rather clumsy or fat word, which we'll come on to later. But, there are different kinds of unconscious processing. There's, how you're born into the world, your early experiences. There's subliminal triggers that you're responding to. There's low attention processing, which Robert Heath has written about. There's, all sorts of physiological responses, which we're learning to measure better. So there are many different kinds. They're not all one thing. And, that's what I cover. And the third area, I suppose, is recognizing that contemporary research practice is beginning to recognize the importance of the unconscious and develop new techniques for making its invisible influence more visible and more measurable in some cases.
And do you have a view on that? Do you think those techniques and tools are going to benefit us?
I think it's a big subject, and it comes back to my sort of fundamental belief that not one method is the way to do it. I still think even if you know which parts of the brain are lighting up, you still need to understand from that human being what it is that they might have been thinking about or experiencing. So, yeah, it's a big subject, and I think we shouldn't go there today.
I think the other thing that was interesting, I Googled unconscious, and there seems to be a new term that people feel more comfortable with, which is non-conscious. And I think it's interesting in itself that there's a sense that if you change the term, somehow it feels slightly less threatening, slightly less scary for people. Okay, so let's talk about the next one. The next one is difference.
Yeah, this mind frame explores categorizing, grouping, or averaging people through their behavior or their opinions or their beliefs. It's fundamental to market research. Why are these people different from those? Why are some people behaving like this, despite what we're doing, and other people behaving like that? So, it's very much about understanding like-mindedness or like behavior versus difference.
Okay. And is it also true to say that one person can have a number of differences within their personality?
Absolutely, and I think if you look back over the decades, there have been attempts at trying to understand our different selves. So, quite a long time ago, the idea of need states came into being, and that's really about different identities. So the simplest example is if I'm buying yogurt. The me that I am when I'm dieting is going to choose a different brand from the me that I am when I'm entertaining guests for dinner and I need some sort of fancy yogurt, or the me that I am when I'm packing my grandchildren's lunch or something. So it is about the different sort of people within oneself. And then there are newer kind of ideas. There's the concept of sub-selves.
Tell us about that.
Well, that's more fundamental needs. So I have to look for my notes here. But for example, all human beings may have a need for self-protection. So behavior could be understood in that sort of way. Or for status seeking.
Absolutely.
And for disease avoidance. You might behave in a certain way because you're terrified of disease, where other people behave in a different way when they're not so. Kin care, looking after your family and so on. So, I forget the name of the person who wrote the book, but it is in the book, the reference. But it is quite an interesting...
I found subcells particularly interesting to read about, actually. And then you also talk about segmentation, and I think we use that word very easily when we talk about how we go about our daily research business. Tell us a bit about segmentation and what you'd warn us about.
Well, I think that it's very easy to mash people together in qualitative research and then sort of create a stereotype. So, I've interviewed 3 or 4 people, and one of them happens to kind of be very sparky or interesting. So I mash all 4 together and talk about this one person as representing a whole group, which is partly true again, but partly not. There are lots of things where it's not. So I'll talk about mash-ups and where there are dangers of stereotyping. And the most important thing, I think, with a segmentation is that you have to ground it in both a behavioural access and an attitudinal access. If you only have an attitudinal access, then it's unstable. So there's quite a lot of talk about. I wrote quite a lot about that because I do love segmentations, but they also can be very sort of manipulated.
And they're a massive investment for our clients. So the better they understand their strengths and so on, the better. Let's talk about the next one. I found this one particularly interesting. This is liking. And I remember as a fledgling researcher when I worked with you, the stress you put on not putting too much store by likability. Liking an ad doesn't mean it's going to succeed and so on. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about your perspective on liking from the book.
Well, liking, as you said, has always puzzled me and challenged me. And when I was writing, a few people have written about it in a research context. They've written about brand love, brand affiliation, brand loyalty, but not the I love it or I hate it response that as researchers and planners, or people in communications, you hear as part of the research process. And so, there is lots that you can find out that other people have explored it. Where I ended up is that liking is a very complex and multifaceted concept. For example, when you say you like something, you could be responding to the aesthetics of it, you could be responding to the ingenuity or the novelty of it, you could be responding because it's meaningful to you in some ways, it would fit into your life. It could be that it just makes you feel warm. It could be that it's not a cliche. So, there are lots of different, and it's important to be able to distinguish what aspect of liking it is.
As well, I suppose there's a difference between cognitively thinking about liking and emotionally thinking about it.
It's not even emotionally thinking about it, it's emotionally
feeling it.
Your body feels liking, not your head.
A visceral thing.
Yeah, a visceral embodied response is what true liking is. But mostly as researchers, we're dealing with, cognitive liking, which is a whole different thing. Yeah.
Okay. And then on to Mindframe 4. Now this one you call behaviour.
Right, behaviour. Let me look at my notes, yes. Behaviour. Well, one thing that's always struck me about briefs that we get is the kind of way that people talk about attitudes and behaviour as one word. So it's sort of explore attitudes and behaviour. It's such an almost cliche in a way. And what I really tried to understand was what is an attitude or an opinion or belief, and what is the relationship between attitudes and behaviour. When I was first in research, attitudes were thought to lead behaviour, to precede behaviour. Now I think everybody, or most people, would know that behaviour changes lead to attitude changes, for example. But one of the things that I found interesting that I write about is that social psychologists define an attitude by using an ABC.
Yep.
So A is the affect, the emotional part of the attitude. B is the behaviour, the actual doing that results from it. And C is your cognitive reasoning for it. So, when you come across something, you can use this analytically to work out whether, the emotion is driving the attitude, or the behaviour is leading to the attitude, or just even the whole rationales are somehow convincing people.
And that would be fascinating. I mean, if we thought a bit about the referendum and the Brexit vote, could you apply that model of thinking to what happened there?
Oh, this is a hypothesis. I would say, if anybody's got a pen, you can write it down, that the levers could be analysed by capital A, which is that they had a lot of emotional investment in this around immigration and so on. B, they actually went out and voted, so big B, and a small c, the cognitive reasoning side was quite, lower level. Whereas the Remainers were mainly and influenced by the campaign. C was in capital letters, B maybe in small b, because they actually were so convinced that we would remain that they didn't maybe go out in their numbers to vote. And C, and A was, that it was quite an emotionless sort of response, I think.
That's interesting. Oh,
But it's only a hypothesis, I don't really know.
Light only a hypothesis, that's fine. And I think this chapter also covers behavioural economics, which, as we all know, a lot has been said, written, spoken about in terms of behavioural economics. And I think you think about the book, Thinking Fast and Slow was a reference you used in your book.
Yeah, and you could use that model of thinking to explain the Brexit result, because one is system one, intuitive, emotional, very quick decision making, and the other is system two. Yeah, exactly.
Good. So now on to number 5, and this is language.
Yes.
My favourite.
It's your favourite.
It's my favourite. Talk to me about this one.
Well, I mean, it's hardly worth saying this, but market research is all about words, isn't it? We get client briefs in words. We ask questions. We have debrief reports, even if they're charts. They're management summaries. I mean, they're just words everywhere. And words are slippery. I think that not everybody understands words in the same way. Words mean different things to different people at different times. So in this chapter, I cover things like discourse analysis, which is, the whole understanding of a whole sort of body of words around a subject, whether it's a medical discourse, none of us can understand what doctors say, or lawyers' discourse, or, political one. Metaphor patterns that are really useful once you're sensitive to them, to helping understand what people really mean. Whether I say, oh, life's on the up, life's on the down, there are many like that. And they help us avoid what I've called for many years fat words, which are words that I assume I know what I mean, but you may not. So words like proposition and positioning, or we go into interview someone and we say, I'm just going to show you a concept, and this is only a route. Well, I mean, what does it mean? How do we know what they understand by this? So it's that sort of area.
And I know that all of these mind frames sort of overlap to some extent, but I think, once again, if we misuse words or we're lazy with words, we can easily manipulate situations or be manipulated ourselves. And that's the why I think it's such an interesting part of not just our relationship with consumers, but also our relationship with our clients and how we understand what they want. I think finally, and I know this was something that you said almost overarched everything, but context.
Mm-hmm. It is really the overarching thing, and it's the key to all human behaviour, and it's very easy to ignore because it doesn't seem so laser focused from a client point of view on what they're really interested in. So the chapter begins with a quote I found, which I absolutely love, which is, if you bake bread in a bakery, you're a baker. But if you bake bread in an art gallery, you're an artist.
That's great.
So, context actually defines and explains so much of behaviour, and particularly social contexts and cultural contexts. I mean, I know that Judy Valentine, in the 80s was describing the importance of semiotics and signs and symbols and how we learn to decode the cultural context. But we've not really paid that much attention until Mark Earl started writing about it, the importance of social influence, because most people deny it. If I were to say to you, how influenced are you by your friends in your latest car that you bought? You'll just look at me as if I'm crazy. It is they're invisible, but really, really important.
And the types of contexts you take into account will differ, obviously, according to what you're trying to find out, I guess. So, each chapter ends with key principles, and these are really far-reaching in terms of their implications. And there's so much data to interrogate and make sense of in today's world particularly. And I was reading a futurist saying that we're going to need a virtual sifter of data sitting around a boardroom table. So it may not even be a human being, because there will be so much data to analyse that monthly that will have to be done for us, which I find really extraordinary. I think at least if we have some of these mind frames in place and we understand the principles of them, what I'd hope it would help us do is to organise ourselves better, to feel slightly less chaotic about the amount of data that we're trying to sift through, and give us some parameters within which to think.
That's my greatest ambition for the book, really. I hope that practitioners, clients, end users, planners would be able to go into a project, whatever that may be, with some hypotheses, which the work can prove or disprove, rather than going into this sort of sense of, oh my God, how are we going to find our way through all this complicated data and stuff.
I was talking to Richard Huntington, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Sarches, and he was saying, I don't even need people to come back to me with the right answer, whether it's qualitative researchers or planners. I want people to come back to me with the answer that has most potential. And I'm going to be talking about this a bit in a paper I'm giving later on, 3rd of November this year for the AQR. We don't necessarily have one right way of thinking, not one right answer. Again, if we form hypotheses, it gives us some structure. And I'm hoping Mindframes will help all sorts of people, younger and older in the industry, to present their data with a sense of structure and a sense of thoughtfulness, and yet not always to provide one answer, but provide a perspective.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I've also wrote about in the book was how important it is for researchers to realise that they're not objective. And when I say researchers, I mean everybody involved in research. It's the end users, the buyers, the planners, and everybody. Because there's no such thing as objectivity.
I think you call them reflexive researchers.
Yeah, it's the fact that you come into it with your own experience, your own points of view, and you need to become aware of those so you can calibrate what somebody's telling you against what you believe, and then see why is it that they are actually different from me. If you just go in this sort of unaware state, I don't think it leads you in a helpful direction.
I don't know if it's possible either.
No.
Okay, so that's fantastic. I think what would be really interesting is just for us to let everybody know now that this book is going to be for sale from the 18th of October for £17.99. I'll show you the cover one more time. Here it is. And it's being distributed by Acacia Avenue. And the great news is that if 50 people or more review it, then it goes on to Amazon. So if you'd all like to get writing, that would be fantastic. And Wendy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jude. And I do hope that you do write up, because my passion is really that we professionalise ourselves. It's a whole part of the movement that's going on. The more people can really understand the basis of research, the more professional we will become.
Fantastic, thank you.